Ever come across a researcher's name and sort of wondered, like, just how impactful are they?
Yeah.
You see that H-index number,
Right.
and it's supposed to give you a clue, but what does it really tell us?
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot, actually. It can seem a bit mysterious,
It does.
this H-index, but it's actually a pretty elegant way to think about balancing the quantity and quality of someone's publications.
And that's what we're diving into today, demystifying the H-index.
Yeah.
We've got some excerpts from a paper by Ghosh and Mukhopadhyay, and they not only break it down simply, but they give us some really cool ways to actually visualize it, get ready for some unexpected geometry.
Yeah, it's more visual than you might think. But first, let's start with the basics. At its core, the H-index is about finding that sweet spot between, how much a researcher publishes and how influential those publications actually are.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, churning out paper after paper. It's about work that really resonates
Exactly.
within the research community.
Exactly. So imagine you're looking at a researcher's body of work, right?
Right.
They might have papers with tons of citations and others with fewer. The H-index is kind of about pinpointing the heart of their impact.
Okay, I like that. So how do we actually find that heart, that H-index number?
Well, think of it like a balancing act. Okay. On one side, we've got the number of papers they've published.
Okay.
And then on the other side, we have the number of citations those papers have gotten.
So we're weighing quantity on one side,
Yes.
and then quality represented by those citations on the other.
Precisely. The H-index is the point where those two sides balance. It's the highest number of papers a researcher has, where ECH of those papers has at least that same number of citations.
Got it. So if I see a researcher and they have an H-index of, say, 15,
That means they've published at least 15 papers, each of which has been cited at least 15 times by other researchers.
okay. So, if you were looking at somebody in your field, you could get a sense of their influence just from that one number.
Exactly, exactly. And what I think is really neat is that Ghosh and Mukhopadhyay, they don't just explain the concept, they actually provide a really clear algorithm to calculate it, even including some Python code in their paper.
Python code.
I know, right?
Dedication. Okay, but you mentioned visualizing the H-index.
And I have to admit, I'm having a little trouble picturing it. How do you actually see the H-index?
This is where things get really interesting. Okay, imagine a graph, right?
Okay.
On the horizontal axis, we plot the number of papers a researcher has published. On the vertical axis, we plot their citations, range from highest to lowest.
So each point on the graph is like one of their papers and how many citations it's gotten.
Exactly. Now, imagine you draw a line through those points. So that's what we call their citation curve. And the H-index, that's the point where this curve intersects with a line representing an equal number of papers and citations.
Hold on, I'm sketching this out as we speak. Okay, I think I'm starting to see it. So the H-index isn't just an abstract number, it's an actual point on this graph. Precisely. And that's where the real aha moment comes in, because this geometric interpretation, well, it does more than just give us a number. It reveals a whole new layer of understanding a researcher's impact.
Okay, I have to admit, seeing the H-index as an actual point on a graph, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's like we're really visualizing a researcher's impact.
Mm-hmm.
But what can we learn from the shape of that impact?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Like, what does that tell us?
So the shape of the citation curve can actually tell us a lot about a researcher's, career trajectory.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So imagine a researcher who's just starting out, right?
Okay.
They might have a few publications, but those papers haven't really had a lot of time to gather citations yet.
Right.
So their citation curve might be, relatively flat at first.
So someone early in their career might have a low index simply because their work just hasn't had time to, make its mark yet.
Exactly, exactly. Now, as that researcher gets more experience, publishes more work, that citation curve starts to change.
Oh.
Some papers might gain traction really quickly,
Right.
resulting in a steeper curve, while others might see a slower, steadier increase in citations.
So you're saying, by looking at the shape of the curve, we can get a sense of how a researcher's work has been received over time.
Yes.
How interesting.
We can see which papers have had the most impact, which ones might be considered sleepers that gain traction later on,
Right.
how the overall body of work has contributed to the field.
That's so interesting. It's like we're not just looking at a snapshot in time,
Right.
but we're looking at a whole timeline of their impact.
It makes you realize that the H-index isn't just about that single number.
Right.
It's about understanding the nuance and evolution of their influence.
This is so cool. This is giving me such a new perspective on those numbers I see next to everyone's names.
Yeah.
But okay, let's talk about limitations for a second. Because I imagine, like, no metric is perfect.
Of course not, yeah.
The H-index has to have some drawbacks, right?
You are absolutely right. Like any tool,
Yeah.
it's got its strengths and it's got its limitations. And it's important to, like, be aware of those limitations when we interpret the metric.
So what are some of the things that, like, we should be keeping in mind?
Well, one important factor is that the H-index, it doesn't really account for differences in citation practices across different fields.
Yeah.
Some fields just naturally have higher citation rates than others.
Makes sense, yeah. Like a groundbreaking paper in, like, a really niche field might have way fewer citations overall.
Right.
Compared to, like, a really solid but not necessarily groundbreaking paper in a much larger field.
Exactly. And that can make it really tricky to compare researchers across different disciplines solely based on their H-index.
Right.
Because it's not,
It's apples to oranges?
it's apples to oranges.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Another important limitation is that the H-index can be really influenced by just a single highly cited paper.
Okay.
So you could have a researcher with one outlier publication, just a ton of citations, and that can skew their overall H-index higher.
So they could have one really influential paper,
Right.
but a lot of other work that hasn't necessarily gotten as much attention.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to look beyond the H-index and consider the entire body of work.
The whole picture.
Yeah, look at what papers are driving those citations. Explore the different areas they've published in. Get a sense of the breadth and depth of their research.
It's like anything else, like context is key.
Absolutely. The H-index, it's a valuable tool, but it shouldn't be the only tool in your toolbox.
I like that.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking about the H-index as like one data point among many,
Yes.
how can we use it effectively and responsibly? Like, what are some practical takeaways for our listeners?
Okay. So on a practical level, the H-index can be a really helpful starting point when you're trying to just, like, get a quick sense of a researcher's influence.
Like if you're on a hiring committee or
Yes, exactly.
reviewing grant proposals or something.
Exactly. It can help you quickly identify those researchers who are, like, potentially worth a closer look.
Right.
But it's important to remember it's just one piece of the puzzle.
One signal,
Yes.
not the whole story.
Exactly. You wouldn't judge a book by its cover.
Right.
And you shouldn't judge a researcher solely by their H-index.
Love that, yeah. So while it can be useful for like a quick assessment, it's important to then delve deeper.
Exactly. Look beyond the number, consider the context, explore the full scope of their contributions, and that's how you gain a truly informed perspective.
It's amazing how much depth there is to this, like, seemingly simple metric.
Right.
Thinking about it visually, as this dynamic curve, really changes how I see the H-index.
Yeah.
It's not just a number, it's like a whole story. It is. It really is.
And it makes me wonder, like, what other stories could we uncover if we start, like, looking at it in new and creative ways?
Oh, yeah.
We've been talking about it at the individual level, like a single researcher.
Right.
But could we use this geometric approach to compare, like, entire fields of study?
Absolutely. Yeah, imagine comparing the citation curves of researchers in, like, astrophysics versus microbiology.
Okay.
We might see some really striking differences
Right.
in the overall shapes of those curves.
Yeah, reflecting, like, different paces of research and stuff.
Exactly. Different paces and patterns of publication and citation.
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
You could even, like, track how the impact of a specific paper ripples outward
Yes.
over time and watch as those citations branch out, almost like a chain reaction. Exactly. Or think about this.
Yeah.
Could we use the H-index to identify, like, emerging areas of research?
Interesting.
Fields where the citation curves are, like, rapidly accelerating,
Wow.
signaling a surge in interest and activity?
That's like using the H-index as a map, not just to see, like, where we've been, but to chart new territory.
Exactly.
Arch.
And that's the beauty of a metric like this, right? It's not meant to be this, like, rigid, definitive measure. It's a starting point.
Right.
It's a catalyst for curiosity and exploration.
I like
It's about sparking new questions, inspiring new avenues of research, and gaining a deeper understanding of how knowledge evolves.
So for all you deep divers out there, next time you see that H-index, don't just see a number.
Yes.
See the potential. See the story. See the geometry.
What's the layer?
Hidden within.
Ask those what-if questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's what deep diving is all about. Until next time.